So you've got this problem. You have a model, and for all intents and purposes, it's done. It's got some nice highlights, shadows, it's even based, but it's just a bit boring. Whether that be a centerpiece model that isn't enough of a centerpiece, or just your 20-man blob of guardsmen that is, well, it's a 20-man blob of guardsmen. It's a bit boring, but it doesn't have to be with this really easy fix. And trust me, by the end of the video, you'll be able to do this. Now, what am I talking about? Flags. Now, don't click off just yet, because I also believed that doing freehands was very hard and really easy to mess up and way out of my skill level, but it's absolutely not. If you're able to do basic, base code wash highlights, you're able to do a solid freehand. To start off, you're obviously going to need a surface to paint this on. Now, I would recommend using an area as large as possible, because while you'll have to spend a bit more time base coating that way, you will save a lot of time by not having to fix every area 50 times because your fingers slightly twitched when you were drawing a little line. Once you've got that, you should think about what you're going to paint on it. Maybe it's a unit insignia that comes from the history of what that unit has fought through, or maybe it's just a cool piece of art you found somewhere that you want to replicate. Now that you have that, you want to break it down into smaller common aspects that you could research online. For example, I wanted to paint a skull. Now, a skull is a very common motif, and there are dozens of painting guides online on how you can just paint a normal skull, so I would really recommend something like that. Get one of those like children's doodle tutorials, how to draw a basic skull, and just replicate it one-to-one. Also, do this with a color that is easy to clean up. If you're painting this on a light background, use a maybe light gray, and if you're painting this on a dark background, well, start with the darker color. Also, you don't need to have planned everything before you start, because, well, for example, I didn't plan anything on the background. I just started doodling and, well, came up with what it's supposed to represent afterward. That's why it looks a bit scuffed. But if you've got a plan ahead of time, that is, of course, going to help. Lastly, as for motifs, I would recommend doing something that you can split in half, like, for example, painting half a skull instead of a full one. This is because being symmetrical is very hard, and if you're just painting half the skull, it doesn't have to be symmetrical to anything. So this will save you a lot of hassle and will make the entire process a lot more fun. Once you've got the basic shape down, outline the entire area as well as the special details that you're going to paint. In my case, the eye sockets, the nose, those little eyebrow dents that skulls have, with a dark color. This will make everything a lot more readable, and more importantly, it's going to give you an outline for where to paint the rest later. It doesn't have to be perfect, as you're probably going to have to repaint this 2 or 3 times anyway, so just get that on there. Now, this is the best part. This is the simple trick that you have to do to take your freehand from a pretty shitty looking doodle to something that really catches the eye and looks great. Add some highlights. Just do this as if you were highlighting any other model. If you're painting a simple pattern, like for example a checkerboard, highlight the areas that are catching light. For example, on a flag, that would be the cloth folds that are at the top. For example, on a flag, that would be the cloth folds that are pushing through, or on armor, that would be probably the higher points, just like you would highlight in any other case. If you're painting a 3D design that has, its own shadows and highlights, like a skull for example, get a reference photo. There's no shame in it. Just Google the thing you're going to paint and add in the necessary highlights. Also, these highlights will be incredibly helpful for adding readability and making this whole thing look good, because the other half of my skull is a Templar cross, because I am doing this for my Black Templars, and that cross is incredibly crooked. It has zero symmetry to itself, and if this were a shoulder pad, it would look really bad. But because I can now highlight the upper and lower areas of the cross and add shadows and all that, it looks really good. And finally, when you're happy with your motif, add a background. Or if you started from background, add a foreground. Whatever you want. Here you can absolutely get creative or just rip something from Google. In my case, I came up with the idea of painting flames afterwards, because I had already base coated this thing yellow a long time ago, but well, I didn't plan for it ahead of time. That's why the flames look a bit crooked, but it doesn't really matter, because if you have a very good centerpiece that is catching the attention, nobody's gonna look at the other areas. In my case, for example, if you look at the flag, you're looking at the skull, maybe the cross, but not at the upper left corner where one of the houses I painted was a bit crooked. And you're done. I apologize for the editing and the filming on this one. It has to be a bit lighter because I am still in exam season, but subscribe.